Okay. I can see someone raise their hands. So that means you can hear me now. Okay, great. Yeah, I see lots of people raising their hands. So that means you can all hear me. Okay, so let's get started now. So thank you very much for your participation in this workshop. So in this workshop, I'm going to walk you through the psychology and the brain sciences behind the importance of speech production. And as you can see here, this workshop is going to be in English, but later we're going to upload the recording to YouTube video, and we will add Chinese subtitle to the video. So for those of you who are more used to Chinese, you can check the video later. You can also always, send me an email to request the video link. So for speech production, we are basically referring to talking. So we're basically going to explore the importance of talking from psychology and from brain sciences point of view. And I believe many of you would say that talking is, of course, something that's very important. I don't really need to tell you that talking is super important, right? Because we need to talk to exchange information, to communicate, right? But to clarify that in this workshop, I'm not going to talk about the importance of talking in terms of its function in information exchange or communication. Instead, I'm going to focus on explaining to you the importance of talking in the sense of its impact on our development, right? Particularly intellectual development. So this is what we are going to explore in this workshop. So let me introduce myself a little bit. My name is Guang Ouyang, and I'm currently an associate professor working at Faculty of Education, the University of Hong Kong. And my research primarily focuses on examining neural signals and try to understand what those signals mean and how the neural signals can tell us about how the brain works, and try to use that kind of knowledge to inform us to better learn and to better develop. So this is what my research is about. And I'm currently the director of a research lab that is called Complex Neural Signals Decoding Lab. As you can see from the name of this lab, uh, in this lab, we are trying to develop methods to decode neural signals, because neural signals are usually something that's very complex and we cannot easily know what they mean. So we have to develop very advanced signal processing method to extract information from those signals to tell us how they are reflecting our cognitive activity or cognitive ability. So this is what the lab is aiming to do. Okay, so without further ado, let's oh, I see the date information is wrong here, right? It's already 2025. It doesn't matter. So let's proceed to the content of this workshop. As I said, we are going to talk about the importance of talking, the importance of speech production, right, in terms of its impact on our development. So for that, we definitely need to talk about the brain. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to first present you some points about the relationship between speech function and the brain system. So first of all, speech is an ability, right? And this ability is actually a very common brain function in typically developing population, which means that it's very normal, it's very common. Most of us can talk. And this function or this ability is so common that many of us actually take this ability for granted, which means that some people don't even think that speech is an ability, right? We can talk, and whenever we want to talk, we just talk, right? So many of us would not think that speech is an ability because it's just a very normal activity that we are doing every day, right? So because we take this ability for granted, so many of us are not aware of the enormous impact that speech activities could have to our development, right? Especially to our intellectual development. And this is what we are going to explore in this workshop. We're going to explore lots of questions, right? Including why is speech important? In what sense is this important? Right? What kind of speech we are talking about? I mean, there are lots of different kinds of speech. Are we going to explore, the kind of speech that is more like a casual talking, like a chit chat kind of activity? No, we are not going to talk about that kind of speech activity. We're going to focus on other kinds of speech activity, which I will introduce later in this workshop. And we'll also explore how is everything related to our brain. So this is what we're going to explore in this workshop. So let me first present you a major claim that we're going to make in this workshop based on all the theoretical foundation that I'm going to present later, which is that talking makes you smart, or talking makes everybody smarter. So this is a claim that we are going to make. So basically, so what we mean is that talking activity or speech production activity can actually enhance our cognitive system in general, right? So this is what we mean by making this claim, and I will explain to you all the relevant theoretical foundations later, right? So first of all, what is smart? Right? What is being smart, or what is smartness? So in psychological terms, when we say, being smart, we are basically saying that we have a good cognitive system. We have good cognitive function, or cognitive ability. Right? So that's the description of being smart from psychological point of view. And a very commonly interested question is that we would all want a good cognitive system, right? This is something that is of common interest. For example, if you are a parent, you would want your kid to develop, their intellectual system, their cognitive system in a good way, right? And for, let's say, senior people, we would want to maintain our cognitive function or cognitive system. We don't really want to go through a deep or a very fast decline, right? So this is something that we would all be interested in. We want a good cognitive system that are supporting good cognitive functions, right? So from psychological point of view, the brain is a system that is supporting different kind of cognitive functions. Right? But the thing is that there's lots of them, right? There's lots of different abilities. We do not just have a single ability, right? And that also means that a person that is good in A may not be good in B, in cognitive B, activity B. So this is something that is complicated. We have lots of different abilities. Right? It's very diverse. I'm going to show you some examples here. So for example, we have sensory abilities, we have motor abilities, right? Those are basic kind of abilities. So sensory ability basically refers to, how well we can see or hear, right? And the motor ability basically refers to how quick we can react to things, how quick we can move our body, move different parts of our body, right? So that's a motor ability. And in most cases, these two kinds of abilities are not like, super important, because there's not like a drastical difference across different people. And even if in some cases you are not having very good sensory ability, like not having good vision, like I'm short-sighted, but I can actually wear a glass, right, to compensate for that. So in most cases, it's not like it's super important. But in some very professional, very special scenarios, like in professional sport competition or e-sport competition, something like that, sensory ability or motor ability will be important. Right? But these are just two examples of cognitive abilities. And some psychologists would not categorize these two as the cognitive ability system or the central cognitive ability system. They would say we have sensory system, we have a motor system, and then we have a cognitive system. But in this workshop, we'll just put them all together. Okay. So these are two examples, and then we have sensory motor coordination, which is also something that's important, and it's a more advanced kind of ability. That is actually needed in some important activities, like when you're driving, right? When you're driving, you definitely need this kind of sensory motor coordination. You need to integrate information in your perception with your motor activity in order to do the task of driving very well. So that's also an example of cognitive ability. And then we have memory ability, and under this category, we have lots of different memory related ability. I'm not going to dive into the details of this memory system, but we all know that memory is a very important function, right? And we need to have very good memory related ability because we need to maintain lots of information for future uses, right? And we have attention, basically refers to how good you can maintain, you can focus your energy, focus your attention on something that you think is important. And then we have executive function, which is a psychological term that basically means the power to kind of like control ourselves, right? To control oneself, to do something that is important, that may be boring but meaningful, right? So you have to kind of push yourself to do things that are important to you. So that's the meaning of executive function. This is also an example of cognitive ability. And then we have reasoning, logic, deduction. We have mathematical abilities. We have lots of different abilities here. So the reason I'm presenting different abilities here is that I want to show you that this is a complicated system. And the inquiry to try to find a way to enhance our cognitive system and different cognitive abilities is definitely something that is very difficult. It's very ambitious, right? You couldn't really say, okay, I will be able to find different methods to enhance different abilities. This is difficult. And also in both scientific domain and also in public domain, we do not have a clear answer what kind of things we can do to enhance all the activities that I'm listing here. And I'm only listing part of the cognitive ability system. This is definitely not an exhausting list of all the human cognitive abilities supported by our brain. Okay. But what we know is that we can change them. We can definitely change our ability, right? So the cognitive abilities are definitely something that can be changed. The thing that we don't know now is what kind of things, what kind of activities, what kind of methods are more effective for us to enhance our cognitive system. So I'm going to present you a different perspective to approach or to describe the cognitive system, which is like a more useful for us to explore methods for enhancing our cognitive system. So instead of looking at different abilities, we're going to use a concise, conceptualization method to describe the cognitive system and to identify the key functions that are universal across different domains, right? So this perspective is so-called information processing. So in recent years, actually in recent decades, in psychology and information sciences, the perspective of using the description of information processing to describe the cognitive system is becoming increasingly common and accepted in scientific domain. So basically, this means that our cognitive system is an information processing system. And this is a very precise description of the cognitive processing system. Why? Because whatever kind of activities that you are doing, you're always processing information. It doesn't matter you are like driving, you are watching a video, you are listening to music, right? You are in a classroom. It doesn't matter what you're doing. You're constantly processing information, right? And this is a very concise and precise kind of description for our cognitive system, right? And under this perspective, we can further identify two very important functional modules. One is information maintenance. The other one is information operation. So I believe these two terms are pretty self-explanatory, right? Information maintenance basically refers to the ability to maintain information in our mind. And information operation basically refers to the activity of operating those information in our mind to understand information, to analyze information, to do a little bit of a manipulation of those information in order to understand things or to perform certain tasks. So that's about information operation, right? And in psychology, sometimes people would use different terms to describe this too, but the meaning is actually the same. So, for example, some people would use information storage to refer to information maintenance. Some people would use information manipulation to describe information operation. But here we're going to use these two terms in this workshop. So now, after introducing these two functional modules, we can see that we can identify central cognitive modules. And then we can just focus on these two modules and try to see what kind of things we can do to enhance them, right? So both information maintenance and information operations are super important, and they are universally needed in any kind of daily life activity, right? For example, when you are watching a video, like a teaching video, for example, from YouTube, and then basically the process is like the information is constantly entering your brain, right? Entering your cognitive system. And you have to uh, maintain the information in your mind. And you also need to actively process or operate those information in real time, right? So the information maintenance is super important here, because imagine that if you can only hold the information for a single frame from the video stream at every single point of time, right? Then you're not going to be able to understand the whole thing, because at every single point of time, you can only hold or process the information for a single frame. And then when you are processing the next frame, you already forget the previous frame, right? The previous video frame. In that case, you are not able to understand the whole thing. Similarly, when you are communicating with people, when you are like processing a speech from a person that is talking to you, and imagine that if you can hold the information only for a single word at every single point of time, then when you are processing next word, you already forget the previous word. Then at every single point of time, you can only hold the information for a single word. Then would you be able to understand the whole sentence? It's impossible, right? So we need a decent amount of capacity to hold lots of information in order to understand something that is complex. So that's information maintenance. And information operation basically means that at every single point of time, when you're holding those information, you also need to understand those information. You need to understand the relationship. You need to understand their implication, their meaning, the logical relationships, things like that. You need to analyze them. So that's information operation, right? So I'm going to show you a conceptualization for us to, to better understand this conceptualization framework for our cognitive system. So I'm going to use this diagram to kind of like abstract the whole cognitive system. We are actually dealing with this kind of system, which is having certain kind of flow that is constantly flowing through a system. And I'm using this diagram to kind of like represent this cognitive system, this information processing system. And here, water basically represents information, right? And one of the advantages of using this kind of simple or simplistic diagram to represent the cognitive system is that we can identify key functions, right, describing this system. Of course, we are not saying that in our brain we have a container containing water, right? We are saying that the cognitive processing system is a system that can be described by two major functions, and they can be clearly um, conceptualized as maintenance and operation. And here, maintenance basically refers to the capacity of this container in holding things, in holding water, right? So this is similar to the brain, the cognitive system holding information. So this is one of the parameters that is important. And then we have operation basically refers to the speed of the flow, right? Which means that if you have a good capacity or efficiency in processing information or operating information, then the information is actually flowing through your mental system in a very high speed, right? So that's referring to the operation system. So as I said, the reason that we are introducing this kind of conceptualization is that we want to identify the key functions, right? And if we can identify the key functions, then we can focus on them when we are exploring different methods to enhance this cognitive system, right? So both of them are important, and I'm going to share with you some examples or some analogies for you to further understand what I mean by maintenance and operation, right? So the first analogy that I'm going to share with you is, the comparison between different vehicles. We have different vehicles. We have sport cars, right? We have trucks, and for sport car, you can see that they are pretty good in speed, right? They're having very high speed. But one of the major disadvantage for sport car is that it's not having good capacity in holding things, right? So that's an example that is having good operation efficiency, but not having good maintenance, right? So this is just an analogy. And then for the truck, um, obviously they are not very fast, right? But they have very good capacity in maintaining information. If the task is to move things from A to B, they can do this task very well, but they're not very fast. So this analogy is showing you that both operation and information maintenance are important, and they're actually complementary to each other, right? Let me show you a different analogy. Imagine that you are a chef and you're cooking, you're preparing for a meal or for a party or something like that. And in this scenario, your skill in preparing food is now representing the operation part, the information operation part, and the size of the table in the kitchen for holding, different food materials is now representing the capacity of maintaining information, right? So if you are pretty good in preparing food, but there's not a big kitchen table, then you would be feeling very much handicapped. You will not be able to prepare good food in an efficient way. But if you are not very good, uh, even though the kitchen table is sufficiently large, right, you're also not going to be able to produce a very good meal. So that's another analogy that shows you what maintenance and operation mean, and why they're both important, and how they are complementary to each other in our cognitive system. Okay, so let me summarize a little bit. From psychological point of view, we think the brain is supporting um, different functions, right? Different cognitive function, different abilities, right? And we want a good function, right? We want this function to run very, very fast, right? So it's very difficult because we have lots of them. We have lots of different abilities. So what we are doing now is that we are trying to use a conceptualization to identify the key functions that are universal across different domains. We don't care about sensory ability, motor ability, attention, or mathematical ability, or arithmetic ability, or executive function. We don't care about them. We focus on something that is universal, right? Which is information maintenance and information operation. One is referring to the function of holding as much information as possible in your brain for you to analyze. And the other one is referring to the speed or the efficiency of operating those information, right? So that's why we introduced this framework. So let me show you some simple tasks that require both information maintenance and operation. So here, simple tasks basically refer to those tasks that have clearly defined rules. And those rules are simple and clearly defined. It doesn't mean that those tasks are easy. Right? It could be very hard. It's just that their rules are clearly defined. So this is what we mean by simple tasks. So for example, when you are playing chess, what is information maintenance here? You have to hold the information about the pattern of the board, right? After one imaginary move or two imaginary moves or three imaginary moves, you have to hold the pattern of the board. Because you need to analyze whether you are in advantage or disadvantage, right? So you have to hold lots of information in terms of the pattern of the board after several imaginary moves. And that's information maintenance, right? So what is information operation here? You have to analyze those information. You have to analyze those patterns to see you will be in advantaged state or in a disadvantaged state, right? So that's information operation is pretty clear, right? So these two functional aspects are pretty clearly manifested in this kind of simple task, right? I mean, it's hard, but I mean, playing chess is definitely not easy, but the rules are clearly defined, right? And when we are doing arithmetic activity, right, both information maintenance and information operation are needed. And I mean, arithmetic ability is actually super important. We all know that, and we would all agree on that, right? So when you are doing this kind of arithmetic activity or mental calculation, um, if you are, using a typical way to do this, then probably you would do the multiplication between the first number and the, unit digit of the second number, and then you hold that information in your mind, and that's information maintenance. And then later you would have to do the multiplication between the first number and the tenth digit of the second number, and then again you hold that information. That's about information maintenance. And then you have to sum them up, right? So that's information operation. So all the intermediate step of multiplication or summation are referring to information operation. And holding those results from those intermediate steps is about information maintenance, right? So again, in this kind of simple task, right, these two functional modules are clearly reflected or manifested. And in psychology, people would use different simple tasks to evaluate, people's ability or cognitive function in different aspects. For example, psychological experimenters would show you this kind of information like a sequence of number, and then this sequence will disappear after a while, and after another while, you will be prompted with an instruction asking you to repeat this sequence. And throughout this process, it's actually your information maintenance ability that is being evaluated, right, by this task. And in another version of this task, you are again presented with a sequence of number, and then this sequence will disappear after a while. And after another while, you will be prompted with another instruction asking you to reverse the sequence and report it. Right? This is definitely more difficult because you have to operate the information in addition to maintaining the information. So this is a task that psychologists will do to assess the cognitive functions in information operation in addition to the maintenance part. So why am I introducing these kind of simple tasks or tasks with very clearly defined rules? Because one of the previous ideas in terms of how to enhance our cognitive system is that we could try to exercise these kind of simple tasks with the hope of enhancing our cognitive system. And the logic is pretty reasonable, actually. Because these tasks clearly use both the functions of information maintenance and information operation. So if we constantly do these tasks, then presumably we can enhance our cognitive system, right? Because we are actually activating these two functional processes. So the previous question is like this: can we use simple tasks to hone our cognitive ability? But unfortunately, this is not convincing, right? So far, this is not super convincing in both scientific community and also in the public domain. Why? Because people are actually questioning about the transferability or so-called generalizability of this kind of exercise. I mean, you can do this kind of task every single day, and these tasks are clearly using information maintenance and operation, right? But whether this kind of exercise would transfer the improvement of ability that you gain from exercising this kind of simple task to real life scenario is something that is questionable, right? So this is something that we are not sure. So this is one of the reasons why this kind of proposal is still not convincing. And the second issue lies in the factor of task familiarity. If you are doing this kind of a simple task, like doing arithmetic, doing this kind of remembering a sequence of number, or in psychology, we have so-called in-back working memory tasks and various other kinds of tasks, right? For evaluating our central cognitive ability, your performance can improve, but it's just your performance. And the improvement of your performance could be due to the fact that you are more and more familiar with the task, right? It doesn't mean that you are really improving some central cognitive ability. So this is the second issue that is making people think that this approach is not convincing. Okay, so now I'm going to present some new ideas that are more like ecological, that makes more sense. So again, the common question that we want to, most of us want to explore is that what kind of things we can do to somehow enhance the brain power, right? And the conceptualization framework that I have been introducing so far is that we can use this um, kind of diagram to describe the system. And the advantage is that we can identify the key functional modules that can precisely and concisely and systematically describe the cognitive system, right? If we can enhance both the maintenance and operation, then you can imagine that this would have profound effect, benefits, right? Positive effect to many different kind of activities in our daily life. So now, instead of using simple tasks that may have the problem of transferability, what we can do is that we can try to identify some complex activities. Right? Remember, previously I mentioned that one of the issues is about transferability. We are not sure if we can use this kind of benefit or any gain from simple task to benefit our daily life activity in real life scenario. Okay, if that is questionable, how about we try to identify some daily life activity or some complex activity that we are already doing in our daily life, right? Because we are doing them in our daily life, so it must be, coexisting or directly transferring to our daily life functioning, right? Okay, so now the question becomes this one: what kind of daily life activity would make full use of both the maintenance and operation, or would exploit these two functions, right? So this is what we are going to explore now. And now I'm going to present the kind of activity or complex activity that is believed to be able to enhance or to primarily use both the function of information maintenance and information operation. And I'll explain to you why. So the activity is so-called cognitive intensive speech production. And this is the central cognitive we are presenting in this workshop as the central cognitive activity. Okay, so what does this mean? From the name of this term, I guess you can somehow feel that it's referring to those kind of speech production that requires pretty high level of cognitive ability or cognitive resources, something like that, right? So let me first give you some examples to facilitate your understanding of cognitive intensive speech production. For example, teaching, presentation, public speaking, right? Doing public speech, communications in formal settings like informal meeting, discussing with people, or even debating with people, or doing an interview with people, or like what I'm doing now. I'm giving a workshop here. I'm also doing cognitive intensive speech production, right? So these are all examples of cognitive intensive speech production, or negotiating with people in a formal setting, or hosting different events, especially those public events. If you have the experience of hosting a public event, you would know that you need to constantly talk, right, to organize the activity. That's also cognitive intensive. And we also have some other rare examples like freestyle rapping, right? This is kind of like a fun example, but this is also under the category of cognitive intensive speech production. And then we have a so-called improvised stand-up comedy, right? So those comedians are super good in terms of coming up with jokes based on some arbitrary terms or arbitrary keywords. So this is also an example of cognitive intensive speech production. But of course, we are not saying that the last two examples, freestyle rapping or doing this kind of improvised stand-up comedy, is something that everybody needs to do every single day. We are just saying that this is also a part of the example under this category. Okay, so what we are saying here is that the activity of teaching, presentation, doing public speech, right, our communication with people in formal setting, they are all under the category of cognitive intensive speech production, and they are all pretty beneficial for us to enhance our cognitive system. Why? So let me explain to you in the next few slides. First of all, let's try to identify what they have in common. What do they have in common? So first of all, it's real time. It's live. What does this mean? It means that when you're doing this kind of activity, you are usually doing in a formal social setting. People are watching you. So you have to do all the tasks in an immediate way. You have to organize all the activities in an immediate way. So it's real time live, right? It's not something that is being recorded and then being played later, right? So that's one of the common characteristic across all these examples that I'm listing here. And there's a very strong feeling or sense of urgency. What does that mean? Um, Imagine that if you are in an urgent situation, right? There's some fire alarm or something like that. If you are in an urgent situation, then you have to try to solve the problem using all your cognitive resources, right? You have to do every single activity the best you can. So that's what you do in an urgent situation. But we're not saying that when you're teaching or when you're doing presentation or when you're doing public speech is something that is in an urgent situation. But you do have this feeling of urgency, right? You do have this sense of urgency, which means that you have to try to maximize the performance in doing every single like a language organization or related task when you are doing this activity. There's a strong feeling of urgency. So the whole thing is pretty intense. Okay. So let me try to use different perspective to explain why this is the case. I'm going to use the viewpoint from cognitive psychology to convince you that when we are doing cognitive intensive speech production, for example, giving a public speech or teaching or giving a presentation or interview, things like that, when we are doing this kind of activity, there's lots of things going on in our mind, in our cognitive system, right? For example, memory retrieval. You have to constantly retrieve information from your long-term memory because you have to produce lots of things, right? So at every single point of time, you have to retrieve information. That's one of the cognitive activity that is happening in your mind. And then you generate some idea and you have to organize those information or those idea into speech. Ideas are not speech. Ideas are just idea. Ideas are just some kind of intention. So before you want people to understand you, you have to turn your idea into speech. Otherwise, people cannot understand you, right? So there's an idea to language transformation cognitive activity going on. And then you also need to make sure that the syntactic structure of your speech is well organized, is something that is in a correct way so that people can understand you. So you generate an idea, but the idea is very raw. And then later, there's lots of things that you need to do to transform that idea into something that people can understand. So you need to make sure that they are grammatically correct, right? So there's lots of activity going on. And of course, phonological processing, which basically means that you have to make sure that you are making the sound right. Otherwise, people also cannot understand you, right? So you see, there's many different kind of cognitive activities going on, right? And because of this, you have to maintain lots of information, right? In different dimensions, right? In terms of the sound of speech, in terms of the syntactic structure, in terms of what you have just said before and what you want to say in the next few seconds. So you have to maintain lots of information. When I'm doing this workshop, I have to maintain lots of information in my mind. And there could be also lots of high-level processing when you are doing cognitive intensive speech production. For example, you need to make sure that your speech is coherent. And in order to do that, in order to achieve that, you have to maintain information across a very long range of your speech, right? Because you want the entire speech to be coherent, right? I mean, so far I have been talking for, I don't know, maybe half an hour, right? And I need to make sure that the content that I'm talking is not something that's like gibberish, right? I have to make sure that they are logical, they are reasonable. So that's high level kind of processing that we need to do. And we have to constantly monitor the environment, for example, the reaction from the audiences. Right? or even the facial expression of the audiences if you are doing this kind of activity. There are lots of things that is going on in your brain, in your mental system. So this is the cognitive psychology explanation of why the whole cognitive activity underlying so-called cognitive intensive speech production activity is very intense. It's very intense. And they are actually primarily engaging both the information maintenance and information operation. I hope I would say that all of you would agree on this part, right? So this is in sharp contrast with other kinds of activities that are usually more relaxing, right? So in a normal scenario, when we are doing daily life activities, like for example, when you're reading an article or writing an article at home in an isolated setting, then in this case, things are usually pretty mild, pretty relaxing, right? And in this situation, the process actually goes like this, right? It can be abstracted as this kind of pattern. The maintenance part is not being fully exploited. It's not being fully used. So you do not really need to maintain lots of information. And the operation is also pretty mild, which basically means that the flow of information is not extremely strong in your mind. So this is a situation corresponding to when you are doing normal activities that are not requiring your active processing. Right? For example, if you are writing an article in an isolated setting in your office or at home, you can spend 5 minutes to finish a sentence. Nobody is going to be interfering with you. No one is watching you, right? So things can be very mild. You are doing this kind of activity on your own pace. But when we are doing cognitive intensive speech production, like giving a public speech or teaching, the situation is like this. We are using the function of information maintenance to the most, and we are using the function of information operation to the most. And I have explained why this is the case in the previous slide, because there's lots of things that is going on, okay? So now the logic becomes pretty clear here. When we are doing cognitive intensive speech production, both the function of information maintenance and the functions of information operation are being exploited, are being fully activated, right? So we could train them, we could enhance them, right? So the rationale is like this. This is the theory that we're presenting in this workshop, which is called the SPECA theory. Speech production enhances our cognitive ability. And here, speech production is actually referring to those kind of, cognitive intensive speech production activity, not like casual talking with your best friend or things like that, not that kind of activity. It's the examples of activity that I'm listed in previous slides. So the rationales go like this. First of all, cognitive intensive speech activity intensely exploits cognitive functions of information maintenance and operation. It's kind of like pushing them to their limits. And I have explained this in the previous slides, right? And the second rationale is also super important. We have brain plasticity. So what is brain plasticity? This is probably, I would say, the most famous discovery in neuroscience. The brain is plastic. The brain can change its internal architectures. There's also a very famous saying, we either use it or lose it. For the brain, you have to constantly use certain function. Otherwise, you will lose it. It's different from a machine like a washing machine or a refrigerator or a smartphone or something like that, right? You have to use it. For other machines, you do not need to use it. They will just keep the same kind of function all the time, right? But for your brain, you have to use it. Otherwise, you will lose it. And if you constantly use certain kind of function, you would enhance it. Why? Because neuroscience has already discovered that the connections between different neurons will be strengthened if those neurons are engaged in the same kind of activity. Let's say when you are constantly doing a cognitive intensive speech production activity, then both the information maintenance and the information operation are being activated, right? And the neural circuits that are supporting information maintenance will be activated. And the neurons within this neural circuit, they will generate activity like spiking activity all the time. And if they are being activated simultaneously, then the connections between them will be strengthened. and then these neural circuits will be stronger, right? So the neural circuits supporting both information maintenance and information operation will be stronger if you are frequently engaging yourself in doing this kind of, cognitive intensive speech production. So that's logic, right? So the idea is that we can use complex activity or skills to enhance our basic cognitive ability, right? So that's the central idea. So instead of using those simple tasks like aim back working memory or remembering sequence of number or simple mental calculation, instead of using those simple tasks to enhance our cognitive ability or basic cognitive ability, we are saying that we can use complex activity that we would do in our life anyhow to enhance our basic cognitive ability, to enhance our cognitive system. So that's the logic, right? And in addition to that, this kind of exercise will also have lots of advantages. For example, this is very ecological. What do you mean by ecological? Ecological basically means that things are practical. It basically means that things that we are doing would have benefit in our real life scenario. So that's the meaning of being ecological, right? And we are dealing with speech productions. Nothing is more ecological than speech production, right? Speech production is things that are um, extremely common in our daily life. So this is definitely something that is ecological. If you say, okay, if you are like remembering a sequence of number or doing M-back working memory tasks, those things may not be ecological because we do not need to do them in our daily life scenarios, right? But we're doing speech production, so it must be ecological. Nothing is more ecological than speech production, right? And the diversity is also very high. From learning sciences theory, we know that diversity is very important for learning. We want to have good learning outcome, learning effect. So we have to expose to many different things in order to have very good learning outcome, right? So that's what is confirmed from learning sciences. And when we are doing speech production, things can be very diverse, right? You can present different things in different occasions. You can choose many different topic for you to teach, to present, to engage in different discussion or even debating, right? So that's super diverse, right? So in terms of diversity, it's also pretty good, pretty high. Complexity, in general, we would want certain kind of skills that enable us to handle complex situation rather than simple situation. And speech production or speech skills are actually defined as complex kind of ability. Right? So the complexity is also high. This would enable us to handle complex situation in our life. And this is also social, right? If we enhance our speech skill, is also social. So you see, this kind of exercise is actually having all round benefit, which means that even if you are not convinced that speech production would enhance our basic cognitive ability, you would probably agree that these advantages that I'm showing here hold, right? That's indeed the case, right? So that's it. So that's so-called SPECA theory. Okay, so let me summarize everything now. The first and foremost point, and the most important point that I want you to take home is that we need to talk. Right? This is the most important point. We need to talk. Why? Talking is not just for communication, but it's also a process that actively and intensely using central cognitive abilities, including information maintenance and operation. Thus, it can enhance them because we have brain plasticity, right? So that's a basic rationale. It is so-called speech production enhances cognitive ability theory. And the examples of talking activity that we strongly recommend and that we believe are super effective and very easily accessible are listed here. For example, doing presentation, discussion, teaching, public speaking. We would recommend that all of us try to find more opportunity to do this kind of activities. Try to sign up in some public event to do, let's say, presentation or public speech or something like that, or teaching, right? Even if there's not many this kind of events, you can still sign up in some event and try to use more time to exercise those activity, right? So this is actually, before this workshop, I'm also exercising this workshop, right? So the exercise of those activity is also cognitive intensive speech production activity, right? So we have to exercise those activities if we do not have that much opportunity to do. But I believe that these kind of examples or activity are still something that's very easily accessible. For example, you can do a presentation in front of your friend, in front of your classmate, in front of your family members. So it's pretty easy to access, to find this kind of opportunity, right? Okay. So in the end, I want to make some clarifications, which I think are very important. So the first clarification concerns the relationship between speech skill and systematic intellectual development. So here, speech skill basically refers to the kind of skill or activity that we are promoting, right? And systematic intellectual development is actually referring to those foundational education that we are receiving, like sciences, mathematics, engineer, and information science and different kind of technology. Those are super important, and we are not saying that we should constantly engage or develop our speech skill in a way that is overturning their importance, right? So intellectual development, including science, mathematics, information science, different kind of technologies, right? Those foundational things are still the most important thing that we need to develop, right? And in addition to that, we should also pay attention to the development of speech skill. What we are promoting is that on top of the foundational development, right, we should actually engage more in speech skill. And we actually think that currently people are actually not doing this in a sufficient way. Right? We are actually against the scenario that people only focus on foundational intellectual development, like sciences and mathematics, right? But totally ignores the development of speech skill, especially those things that we need in cognitive intensive speech activity, right? We promote the development of speech skill, but not its overturn of basic and systematic intellectual development. The second clarification concerns the relationship between the development of speech skill and personality. So I believe so far, many of you would probably think that we are kind of like promoting certain kind of personality that is more like those outgoing kind of, those extroverted kind of personality, right? But this is definitely not the case. We are not promoting or preferring any kind of personality. With that being said, we actually believe that it's not contradictory that a person is trying to actively engage themselves in developing their speech skill and those kind of cognitive intensive speech production activity, while being an introverted kind of person, it's totally not a problem to be an introverted kind of personality. It's not a problem at all, right? What we are promoting is that we should actually try to find more opportunity to enhance our speech skill, to try to find more activity or engagement in doing a presentation, teaching, discussing with people, or even debating with people. But being an introverted kind of person is totally not a problem. I mean, some people really want to enjoy their personal life when they are off from work. They want to play a little bit of video game, and they don't really like that much of social activity. That is actually not something that we think is a problem, right? But we actually think that it's not contradictory for an introverted person to actively engage in training or development of speech skill, right? We promote the development of speech skill, but not any specific personality. So this is the second very important clarification that I want to make. Okay, so it's almost the end. So this is the last slide, and in this slide, I'm going to talk about some scientific research related to all the things that I have been introducing so far. So up to this point, I have been talking about the rationales, the theoretical foundation supporting that cognitive intensive speech production is beneficial, is having all-round benefit, is able to enhance our cognitive system in general. And this is something that is logical, right? But it's still a theory, right? Even though it's super logical, I believe that many of you would agree that everything is reasonable. But still, we have to scientifically prove them, right? So for example, if you say like doing physical exercise is good for our health, this is something that most of us would agree, but we still need to prove that, right? So we are now running a project that is trying to provide scientific evidence for the things that we are presenting here, and we will just follow a very typical intervention study. We will do this kind of speech intervention. We will try to promote people's speech activity. And we will do pre-test and post-test, which is basically measuring their brain, measuring their cognitive ability, reflecting their basic, information processing ability. And we also do lots of intermediate monitoring in between. Okay, so this is the project that we are going to do. So what do we measure? We're going to measure the change in basic cognitive abilities as compared to the control group, right? Following a standard kind of intervention study. And we will also measure biological indicators of cognitive abilities because those indicators are immune to task familiarity. So earlier I mentioned that one of the issues in doing cognitive ability enhancement research is that when we are using some behavioral tasks to measure people's improvement or change in cognitive ability, it could be confounded by their familiarity with the task, right? But if we can identify some biological or neurobiological indicator, they are more immune to task familiarity because they are objective, and there could be some intrinsic or inherent neural traits that are associated with the central cognitive ability. Right? So if we can identify, and actually in our previous project, we have identified some neural indicators, and we will monitor these kind of neural indicators because they are immune to task familiarity. So this is a project that we are running now. If you are interested in this project, you can also contact me and discuss with me or ask me any questions. So that's it. This is the workshop. Thank you very much for your attention. And all questions are welcome now. And but I'm not sure how to do this because this is a webinar. So if you have question, could you raise your hand? And then I think I will allow you to talk. Right? You can raise your hand, and then I will click the button of allow to talk, and then you can ask questions. I think but first of all, you have to raise your hand. Otherwise, you can just try to type something. But anyway, try to find the button for you to raise your hand, and then I will just allow you to talk. Okay. I'll allow you to talk. Oh, so Liu Xinyang.
Yes, my question is, I'm a little vague about the conclusion that the speech skill cannot enhance the overturn of cognitive skill. So, what do you mean by this sentence, this conclusion?
You mean in a clarification?
Yeah, I need a further clarification. So, does it mean it's a specific domain, not an overturn domain of cognitive skill, right?
This one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much for this question, which is a very good one. And this would allow me to make a further clarification for audiences here. So thank you very much for this question. So what we mean here is that we believe that developing speech skill is super important. The reason is that it can enhance our cognitive system in general because speech content is very diverse, and then the whole cognitive activities underlying cognitive intensive speech processing is very intense, and then we are constantly training these two functional modules, information maintenance and information operation. So it's very, very good, and everybody of us should try to do this kind of activity more to enhance our cognitive system, to make sure that we are developing a good cognitive system. But we are not saying that people should focus on this too much, and in the end, they are kind of like becoming a person that is pretty good in speech skill, but ignore the development in other domains like learning those foundational knowledges of science and mathematics and technology, this kind of thing. Right? So what we are saying is that we still need to focus primarily on those foundational intellectual development. And on top of that, we also need to try to find more opportunity to do cognitive intensive speech activity. So that's what I mean. So I think yeah. You Liu Xinyang, I think you can continue to talk. You are still raising your hand, right?
Sorry. Sorry. Thank you for your clarification about the
No problem.
sentence. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your question.
Yeah.
Okay, for other audiences, if you want to ask, you can raise your hand and then I will immediately see you and I will allow you to talk. 雨桐 Okay, 柯雨桐
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question about the measurements of the of how good is speech skills and also with the control of logical reasoning ability and speech ability. For example, it is I think it's very normal for some students or some people that have good speech skills and or low speech skills, but with very good logical reasoning. So maybe after the intervention, they may enhance their ability in reason in speech skill, but maybe just their reasoning skill is still the same. They just enhance their speech skill. So does it also make sense that the development, the intervention of this kind of intense speech skill, it's beneficial for their cognitive ability?
Okay, thank you very much. This is an excellent question. So first of all, our kind of belief is that the brain is a system that is, designed in a computationally efficient way, which means that when we are doing different kind of activities, we're not like using a totally different brain system to do that kind of activity. Let's say if you're doing activity A, and then the brain is using this subset of its neural system or neural circuits to do this task A. When you're doing task B, then the brain is using a different subset of the neural system to do task B. Right? And these two subsets are not overlapping. This is not something that we believe. We believe this is not the case. And I think that it's actually a consensus in neuroscience that the brain is actually using a central nervous system or neural network with lots of overlapping to support different functions, which means that when we are doing activity A or activity B, there's actually a significant overlap of the underlying neural circuits or neural systems supporting both activity A or activity B. Okay, so things like logical ability, logic deduction or reasoning, right? They are kind of like not like totally the same with speech production, but there should have certain overlap because when you are doing speech production, you are constantly making like various kind of reasoning ability. Like when I'm answering your question now, I'm actually doing lots of reasoning in my mind, right? So speech production activity can be very broad. Unless you are doing those kind of speech production that is just reciting something. This is actually something we are not promoting. We're saying that we have to actively engage ourselves in those speech production that is more like in a live setting in which you really need to interact with people. So let's say you're discussing with people or I'm answering your question now and I'm actually doing a little bit, actually quite a lot of reasoning in my mind. And reasoning is basically lots of information operation that is supporting logical deduction, right? So this is those kind of speech activity that we are promoting. Let's say, let me try to use another example. If you have to host a public event, right? And then you have to actually monitor and then try to observe lots of situation in the activity, right? in the scene. And you have to kind of like analyze what you need to do. So there's actually lots of reasoning activities going on. And reasoning is actually totally related to logic deduction, right? So of course, we are not saying that when we are doing speech production or organization, it's totally the same with basic logic deduction, but these two have overlap. So this is our theoretical perspective, these two actually overlap, especially when you are doing those kind of speech that you really need to actively organize information in a coherent way, right? So, I mean, but you are right. We cannot, even this is logical, it's some kind of like a theoretical rationale. And what we're going to do is that we're going to demonstrate this is the case. I mean, this is the hypothesis, right? So the intervention project that I'm showing here is basically the thing that we're going to do to demonstrate that actively engage people in those kind of speech production would actually enhance those basic cognitive abilities, including logic, deduction, and reasoning. And this is something that we're going to measure and demonstrate. So that's it.
Oh, okay. In fact, I have some question about because you just you may mean that through the intervention is the like the universal improvement of the cognitive ability, but how to, I mean, divide different skills, different the enhancement of different abilities, or just after the experiment or after the pre-test and post-test comparison, we know the whole improvement of cognitive skills, but it's very hard to divide different cognitive skills abilities, such as the ability of logical reasoning, the ability of speech skills.
Thank you. This is another good question. And what we are going to do is that we are going to follow some well-established psychological test, which is the things that are developed in psychometrics, right? And they have a very good set, which is usually called a battery for testing different cognitive ability. And they have already defined different cognitive ability, which is basically in different domains. And for each domain, there is some tasks that have been developed to measure those things. And those are things that have already been developed in psychometrics. They may not be perfect, but this is something that people are doing. Let me try to give you some examples. We have things like basic reasoning, and we have things like working memory, and we have things like executive function, and then we also have things like spatial cognition, right? And of course, mental calculation ability or things like that. So basically, there are different domains, and for different cognitive domain, we actually have different tasks developed to measure different things. And this is not something that we arbitrarily decide. And there's actually a system from psychometrics to measure different cognitive domains.
Thank you. I
No
have no
problem. Thank
questions.
you. So any other questions from the audience? Okay, Stefan, allowed. Okay, Stefan, you can talk now. Yeah. So Stefan, you can talk now. You should unmute yourself.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Ouyang, for your excellent sharing. And I have actually two questions. And then my first question is about the analogy of the water flowing tank. That analogy. And I'm wondering if how the maintenance and operation might interact in such case, like if a high operation would actually impede the maintenance. Let's say when there's a high water flowing would make the volume like smaller. Are these two things actually independent or dependent? And then my second question is about are there any practice effects or task familiarity effect of the content intensive like speech production skills? Like I'm thinking a hypothetical case where, let's say there is a person A who is an extremely fluent but illogical speaker, and there's another person B who is an extremely disfluent but logical speaker. So in this case, like person A is over practiced in the speech skills, but who is smarter in this case? Thank you.
Okay, those are all good questions. So first of all, let's talk about this diagram first. The question in terms of how these two functional modules, let me use one of the previous slides that's easier for me to, yeah, this one. First of all, this is a very simplistic diagram. This is only for us to kind of like understand these two functional modules, the concept of these two functional modules better, right? And I'm not using this diagram to try to make any like very rigorous like psychological points about these two functional modules, because in the end, I actually didn't separate these two functions, right, in the later part of my workshop. And this is actually super conceptual in terms of how these two functional modules entangles with each other. This is actually a super complicated issue, and we do not think that these two things are totally separated from each other. Right? This is something that we do not believe to be the case. Right? These two functional modules are definitely something that is interacting with each other, and how to clearly separate them. That's maybe some research question that is of interest in very basic psychometrical study. Okay, but conceptually, these two are different. So we can actually prove, and this is actually one of our ongoing projects, we can prove that these two functional modules, they are different. We can prove that they are different. We just use, those common like psychometrical modeling, like a structural equation modeling, factor analysis. We can measure people's behavior, from two different tasks that are measuring different functional modules like maintenance and operation. And then we can analyze their cross individual variability to show that from the covariance metric, we can see that these two functional processes are different, right? We need two factors to explain the two of them. But we cannot say that they are not interacting with each other, and how they are interacting with each other. It's a complicated question. But here, for the SPECA theory that we are presenting in this workshop, we do not really differentiate these two functional processes. What we are claiming is that when we are doing, or when we engage ourselves in this kind of cognitive intensive speech production activity, both of these two are needed, right? And conceptually, this is pretty intuitive. I have already explained that in one of the slides, right? Both of these two are needed because we need to maintain lots of information, and we also need to operate those information in real time. So this is something that is a consistent, actually, right, with our subjective experience, right? So we are maintaining information, we are operating information. And then if we engage more in this kind of cognitive intensive speech production, we can actually enhance both of them. But the question whether or not these two functional processes interact with each other, this is something that is that our project is not able to answer, right, in a very like strict or very precise way, right? But we actually think that they, of course, they have to have some kind of interaction with each other. So this is my response to the first question. The second question is about familiarity effect of speech activity, right? So for example, some people are more and more familiar with speech. They are very fluent, right? And but there, let's say, some central cognitive abilities like logical ability or basic reasoning may not be that high, right? I mean, first of all, there is definitely certain kind of familiarity effect. There must be familiarity effect, and this is something that we can never get rid of, right? I mean, if you can engage more in this kind of cognitive intensive speech production, and you try to do more, like say, presentation, or try to engage in this kind of different kind of teaching activity, or maybe debate with people, right? Eventually you become more and more familiar with the settings, with everything, so that the enhancement effect may be actually weaker later, right? But the whole process is still enhancing, is still able to enhance your ability in maintaining information and operating information in real time. Right? So it's the existence of familiarity effect does not kind of like does not invalidate the effect of using cognitive intensive production to enhance basic cognitive system. I mean, there will be some familiarity effect there, but it doesn't really invalidate the power of this kind of activity in enhancing basic cognitive ability, right? So this is one of the comment that I want to use to respond to your question. And the second thing is that compare with other approaches, like let me just use those extreme examples, like using simple tasks, like maybe like MBAC or maybe dual MBAC, this kind of task to enhance. Compare with them, the diversity of speech production is actually extremely high. This is actually also consistent with our experience. It doesn't matter what kind of things that you are engaged in or how long you have been engaged in. Like I have been teaching for, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 years. Every time when I'm teaching in a classroom, I always feel that I'm organizing something new. So it's this kind of activity, speech production, because you can talk about different things. There's always different topic for you to discuss, to talk, to teach. There's always new knowledge. There's like AI kind of thing. There's always new things for you to engage yourself in. So the diversity is extremely high. So this kind of exercise is very powerful in terms of maintaining a high level of diversity. And I would say it's actually much better than all other kinds of activity, right? So that's my response about the familiarity. I mean, it's there for sure, but this activity, as compared to many other activities, is much more powerful in terms of maintaining a high level of variability and novelty in its content. So that's it. So yeah, that's my response. Stephanie, do you want to further ask anything else, or is there any other questions from other audiences? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, I think that's an excellent answer to my questions. And then I just want to point out maybe it will be good to have some control measure for the pre-post treatment control design. Like,
I mean, it's necessary. It's necessary. It's not good. It's necessary.
Yeah.
We will definitely have that.
Have a range of like different cognitive functioning. I mean, tests in addition to this speech production assessment. Yeah.
Yeah, this is part of the project.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you. So any other questions from other audiences? Okay, so if there's no other questions, let's stop at this point. And again, thank you very much for participating in this workshop. And I hope all of you have a very great weekend. Okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye.